Bueno, in this next conference, we have an issue very important. The new peripheries, geopolitics, and evangelization. And it's Antonio Spadaro SJ, La Civiltà Cattolica. You have the honor of the microphone.
Thank you so much. I know that this is the perfect time for taking a nap, so feel free. Anyway, I hope not to be helpful to put you into a sleep mode. So the topic you gave me is the new peripheries, geopolitics and evangelization. And I want to start quoting a message that Pope Francis released for the 50th World Communication Day 2016. Pope Francis said, "Our political and diplomatic language would do well to be inspired by mercy, which never loses hope." So he put a direct connection between political language, diplomatic language, and mercy. This is why geopolitics and mercy, from my point of view, are linked in the vision of Pope Francis. You have to consider my speech also a kind of a witness, because I travel with Pope Francis in all his apostolic trips around the world. So I experienced with my eyes, with my life, what this means for him. In the same year, in January, during the traditional annual meeting with the ambassadors accredited to the Holy See, Pope Francis mentioned mercy 8 times. So he spoke about mercy 8 times, talking to the ambassadors to the Holy See. And he said clearly, mercy was the common thread linking my apostolic journeys in the course of the past years. So the mercy is the connection between, among different trips around the world. So is the inspiration, the fil rouge. So this link between politics, diplomacy, and the gospel of mercy clearly shows the strong links Francis sees between his vision of the world, international politics, diplomacy, and mercy. So here are some important questions for you on this matter. I don't pretend to solve all questions. I just want to put more questions for you to enjoy. And so the first one is, how can mercy be understood as a form of political and diplomatic action? It looks like an oxymoron, politics and mercy. What does diplomacy of mercy mean within the pontiff's geopolitical vision? And how does it unfold concretely in his apostolic voyages? Mercy changes the meaning of historical process. This is very important to know. For Pope Francis, mercy doesn't have just to do with my personal life, me and God, or me and the others, but also as an impact in the historical processes. For Francis, mercy is not an abstract concept. It's the action of God within the life of this world, in societies, human groups, in families, of course, and individuals. God not only acts through the lives of individual people, but through the historical processes of peoples and nations, even the most complex and intricate ones. The Church itself is described by Francis as being fully part of our cities its borders demarcated only by the permeable, flexible, tent-like walls of the so-called field hospital. Do you remember this expression? Do you remember when he used this expression for the first time? No. In the interview he gave to me before the Evangelii Gaudium. But you know why I'm saying this? Because we spoke for 3 afternoons, so I had this huge privilege to spend 3 afternoons with him. And that was at the very beginning of the pontificate. But I realized that he listened. When you put a question, he answers and he listens. And so he used materials we shared in the interview inside of the Evangelii Gaudium, who was almost already done when we spoke. So he absorbs questions. And so this image came up in his mind, and then he used it again in the Evangelii Gaudium many other times. But I was really deeply struck when I heard this image, because I realized that it was not an image for saying that sometimes, as a cardinal said, sometimes church could be a field hospital. He said the church is a field hospital. So it's a metaphor, an ecclesiological metaphor. It's a metaphor for communicating the nature of the church. What then does mercy as a political category mean? We could say never consider anyone or anything as definitively lost in relations between nations, peoples, and states. This could be a good definition. Never consider anyone or anything as definitively lost in relationships between nations, peoples, and states. This is the heart of the political significance of mercy. So my address to you this afternoon seeks to spell out the geopolitical significance of Francis' diplomacy of mercy through some, if I have time, 7 specific aspects in his vision. The first, an incomplete and open diplomacy. The dynamic of mercy obliges us, even conceptually, to operate in a way that allows for open thought or incomplete thought. These are 2 other expressions he used when I interviewed him. And he was speaking about Jesuits. Are there Jesuits in this room? Good to know. So he was speaking to us, saying that we should have an incomplete thought and an open thought. Addressing the writers of my review, La Civiltà Cattolica, which now comes out also in Spanish and English, so you can subscribe. So when we celebrated the publication of the 4,000th issue, he received us in the Apostolic Palace for an audience. He gave us a wonderful speech. You can find it online. If you put 4,000 Civiltà Cattolica Pope Francis. And he said, the crisis is global. Wow. The crisis is global. And he added, only truly open thought can face the crisis, understand where the world is going, and handle the most complex and urgent crisis. You need to have an incomplete and open thought for understanding what's happening in the world and in the church also. Sometimes we say we should have a complete thought, a strong way of thinking for understanding the dynamics of this world. This is absolutely not the way of thinking of Pope Francis. Open thought is flexible thought. It understands the situation as they are taking place and knows how to evaluate meaning and consequences, even beyond appearances. There are countless situations where the Holy See and Pope Francis has made a major contribution to international politics using this open thought. I just want to give you some examples. Consider, for example, how important it is for the Holy See not to fall into the trap of putting Sunnis and Shiites, Iran and Saudi Arabia, Riyadh and Tehran as the opposing forces and taking one or other side. This is very unpopular in this country, right? But since I'm Italian, I can speak freely. We recall, among other things, that the Iranian president was received by Pope Francis on January 6, 2016. The Vatican's press office drew attention after the meeting to, I'm quoting, the important role that Iran is called to carry out together with other countries in the region to promote adequate political solutions to the problem hitting the Middle East, countering the spread of terrorism and arms sales. End of quote. The Holy See has established regular diplomatic relations with Iran, something that does not exist with the Kingdom of, say, Saudi Arabia. However, it should be remembered that on November 22, 2017, Pope Francis received an official delegation from the Saudi Kingdom led by Dr. Abdullah bin Fahad Al Aidan, advisor to the Minister of Islamic Affairs, and composed of about 10 representatives of the Ministry of the Interior, Justice, Culture, and Media. We read on the website of the Embassy of Saudi Arabia to Italy, since there aren't formal diplomatic relationships between the Holy See and Saudi Arabia. So we can read in the website of the Embassy of Saudi Arabia to Italy that, quote, the delegation conveyed the sense of the kingdom's deep esteem to His Holiness for the noble position taken and for the declarations in which the Holy Father calls for peace and coexistence, rejecting any link between religion and extremism. End of quote. So only an open thought allows the Holy See to talk with Iranians and Saudi Arabians. Or another example, which is pretty unpopular in this country, but since I'm Italian, I can feel free. It's China. Oh, there you go. Speaking about open thought, think of Francis' desire for a bridge with Xi Jinping, China, symbolized by the bridge in airspace that has allowed the Pope to fly over the territory of the People's Republic on 3 occasions for the first time in history. John Paul II was never allowed to fly over China. For the first time, a Pope has been allowed to fly over China when the Pope went to Korea, back and forth, and when he flew to the Philippines. An important element of the journey to Myanmar and Bangladesh in December 2017 was the fact that the Pope was the first to consider explicitly the new role that China wants to have and already has in the international context. This is a fact that Francis himself summarized during the press conference returning to Rome from Dhaka, Bangladesh, with these words, quote, "It's true that China today is a world power. If we look at it from this side, it can change the panorama." End of quote. So we have to be aware of the panorama. And if you see things from other point of views, the panorama could change. Besides, we know all too well that we cannot think about peace in the world without considering the role played by China. There is no way. In our age, with our commercial wars and inflamed souls, this reflection attains even greater value. The signing of a provisional agreement between the People's Republic of China and the Holy See was announced by the press office of the Holy See on September 22nd, 2018. You are aware of that, right? Institutional dialogues between China and the Holy See have been going on for over 30 years. Since 1986, it was St. John Paul II who started this formal and official talks, a talk between delegations. It would be wrong then to imagine that these steps forward are tied to recent times. They are rather an important step on a journey made of steps taken by both parties, China and the Holy See. These are concretized in the full recognition of full communion to the Chinese bishops ordained without pontifical mandate, and in an agreement about the way of nominating future pastors. Of course, Francis was not the first pope to allow this. He is following the steps of his predecessors. So many bishops have been recognized, even if they haven't been ordained with pontifical mandate. Among them, a Jesuit, Bishop of Shanghai, Bishop Jin Luxian, who died in a fame of sanctity. So he was ordained without pontifical mandate, but just for saving the life of the Catholics in that country. And so Benedict XVI recognized him as a legal bishop for the church. So Francis is following this path. Nothing new in this sense. But now the difference that all the bishops are in full communion with the Holy Catholic Church in the world and with the Holy Father. So also those who haven't been recognized yet are in communion. The first sign I saw with my eyes, and I was really moved, was at the Synod of Young People. I was a member of that synod, and as I was in the Synod for Amazonia. And 15 days after the signing, for the first time in the history, 2 Chinese bishops have been allowed to fly from Beijing to Rome for attending with all the other bishops of the world the Synod of Bishops. I saw the Pope met them for the first time, at the hug they shared, and how they kissed each other at the cross, and how the Pope was moved preaching at Mass, remembering all of us that there were 2 Chinese bishops for the first time. And I saw how all the other bishops, especially the bishop of the Philippines, Korea, Japan, and so on, welcomed them. And we made a selfie. I was among them. I don't know why, but I was just there. So there is a selfie, and all of them took a selfie. So also, Francis has created, the first time in history after the revolution, a new diocese in the Chinese territory. So for the first time, and after recently, a couple of months ago, 2 new bishops have been ordained, and for the first time in the celebration, the name of Pope was mentioned, saying that they were ordained with the mandate of the Holy Father. For the first time ever. So, for the first time after the revolution, the Chinese government recognized the specific role of the Pope in choosing and appointing bishops in the country. What's happening in China is more or less the same thing that happened in Vietnam under Benedict XVI, who made the same agreement with the communist Vietnamese government. It's the first time the Chinese accept that a foreign leader could have a leading role for ruling social life in China. This is a revolution. The agreement between China and the Holy See, you see the open thought, the incomplete thought. The agreement between China and the Holy See is radically and essentially pastoral. Has nothing to do with diplomacy in terms of recognition in political terms. So many people, especially in this country, are scared that the Holy See will withdraw the recognition of Taiwan. Of course, this country doesn't have any official diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, but they are very scared that the Holy See will cancel the diplomatic ties with Taiwan. By the way, but this is not the point at all. So the agreement is not diplomatic. We still have, the Holy See has still diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, and they're not thinking to change this, but the agreement is just pastoral and about the bishops. So it's radically and essentially pastoral. The aim is to let the church better preach the gospel without losing itself in internal conflicts that could be overcome with the goodwill of all concerned. Certainly, this agreement also represents a message of hope in a world where conflict and fear dominate the horizon. And I can tell you, because I saw in my eyes, I was in Beijing for the Corpus Domini last year, a few months ago. And so I wanted to go to Mass. And I decided to go to, not the cathedral, but one of the main churches in Beijing. The church was packed with people, all of them singing. This was an official church. It has always been an official church. Packed with people, singing together, knelling, praying, venerating the Eucharist. The Eucharistic procession was long, accompanied by songs. I don't want to idealize anything, but I was shocked and surprised seeing the faith, the Catholic faith of these people. We should not see the agreement as a point of arrival, but as a starting point, as told you before. Another important action to remember is the improvement in relations between Cuba and I'm Italian, I'm sorry. I feel free to speak. And North American continent. But you know what happened and its meaning much better than I do. So, but I just want to quote how the Cardinal Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin, in this case, described the Francis engagement in this case. Quote, "The pontiff did not want to rewrite history, but to move it forward." End of quote. For me, this is the key. The pontiff did not want to rewrite history, saying that what happened didn't happen. No, he doesn't want to rewrite history, but to move the story forward. Again, Colombia, but you know better than me. And let's get back to what I experienced in Colombia. Is here. I know it's a mess, still a mess. And but what happened is here, because I saw in my eyes a lady who lost his father, her husband, her daughter, and her son, because FARC. And he gave her witness in front of all of us. And just in front of her, there was a guy from the FARC who stood up and told all his story since he was 14. He was kidnapped, and then he learned how to use guns, and And at the end of this witnesses, these two hugged together in front of us. And I saw such symbols, powerful symbols. that actions, acts, not just symbols, of the reconciliation and the meaning of the reconciliation. Let's go forward. We saw also this process of peace and reconciliation at work in the case of Rohingya in Myanmar and Bangladesh. In his trip to Myanmar, Pope Francis wanted to hold ever present the building of the country, he said. Because of this, he knew how to talk about the Rohingya and a lot in a way to be listened to without sharpening tensions and provoking restrictions or polarization that would have only complicated the situation. And then he encountered them in Bangladesh, face to face, 16 people who he listened to and with whom he asked to pray. Again, these images are in my heart. I was just behind the Pope, just by chance, by grace maybe. And so I saw these 16 poor people crying. And the Pope became moved, and he cried with them. So at some point he said, please, could somebody say a prayer? Some of you. So a person among them, I don't know, an imam, maybe, I don't know, but one of them started to pray, and all of them prayed. And that was a powerful sign. And it was not just a sign, but was something real. No? Peace is something real, it's not symbolic. As these and other cases show, the Pope's position consists not in saying who is right and who is wrong, for at the root of all conflicts is a fight for power or regional dominance, or what the Pope calls a vain pretext. So there is no need to take sides for moral reason. The interest of the Pope is not to saying you're right, you're wrong, but to dialogue for finding a way out. And if you don't dialogue with all the parties, you are not able to find a way out, to find a solution. And so this is the lesson we can learn from this open thought. The Pope rejects the mixing of politics, morals, and religion that leads to the use of a language that divides reality between the absolute good and the absolute evil, between the axis of evil and the axis of good, between the goodies and the baddies. For Francis, the history of the world is not a Hollywood movie in which our boys came to save us from those people. He knows there are always different interests at stake, and that different sides act out of standpoints that are usually morally ambiguous. Pope Francis wants to meet the major players in the action, to create an encounter in which all sides can think together and seek the greater good, exercising a soft power, what we call a soft power, that is a specific characteristic of the international politics. An example, on the afternoon of November 27, 2016, Francis agreed to receive privately the highest military authority of Myanmar, the terrible General Min Aung Hlaing, who reduced the Rohingya in those miserable conditions, and with whom he spoke about the situation of the country in this time of transition. He accepted to meet him, as Pope Leo X accepted to talk to Attila. How do you call him in English? Attila, okay. The Pope knows perfectly well that the politics of a national reconciliation cannot avoid also invoking the military of the government in Myanmar, and this is why he accepts, if asked, to meet all the parties involved. Here's the pontiff comment about that meeting. He said that on the way back to Rome. And that could be useful for understanding why he feels free to speak to the political leaders, any kind of political leaders. He said, speaking you lose nothing, you always gain. And he clarified. He was referring to the general of Myanmar. I did not negotiate the truth, I assure you. But I did it in such a way that he understood a bit that a path, as it was in the bad times, renewed today, is not viable. End of quote. So the meeting corresponds to the logic of Bergoglio, accepting the request for a meeting if it's requested by one side involved in a conflict or the other, and always considering that dialogue is more important than suspicion. This is the first step I want to do with you tonight. The others will be shorter, of course, than this one. So the second one, the geopolitics that dissolves fundamentalism and fear of chaos. Francis never gives in to the temptation to identify religion with fundamentalism. The Pope is light years away from the theorist of a clash of civilizations and religions, which is spread out in many places in this world at the moment. What underlies the persuasive temptation for a spurious alliance between politics and religious fundamentalism? Fear of chaos. Indeed, it functions thanks to the chaos perceived. If you want to gain votes, let the people be scared. Create confusion, speak about confusion, and you will gain a lot of votes and a lot of money. The political strategy for political success, because one of amplifying the rhetoric of conflict, exaggerating disorder, agitating the souls of the people by painting worrying scenarios that bear no relation to reality. This is why Francis is carrying forward a systematic counter-narrative to the narrative of fear. There is a need to fight against the manipulation of this era of anxiety and insecurity. In his address to the Korean Council of Religious Leaders, Francis said, quote, "We are called to be heralds of peace, proclaiming and embodying a non-violent style, a style of peace, with words clearly different from the narrative of fear and with gestures opposed to the rhetoric of hatred." End of quote. Francis is courageous here in giving no theological, political legitimacy to terrorists, while avoiding any reduction of Islam to the Islamic terrorism. Nor does he give credence to those seeking a holy war. Francis even manages in a provocatively gospel manner to describe terrorists with an expression that really scandalized me when I heard it for the first time. Probably you will be as I was. But it made me thinking. And the definition is, this is the definition that Pope Francis gave to terrorists. Poor criminal folk. Poor criminal folk. Folk. People. Poor criminal people. Do you like it? Yes. I don't like it. I'm Italian. No, I really like it. Of course I really like it. But when I heard it for the first time, I was struck. Because he said two things here. Condemnation. Criminal people. Compassion. Poor. He was able to combine condemnation and compassion, which is not easy. Or you condemn, or you are compassionate. How can you be merciful if you are condemning? poor criminal folk. It's an expression that shows at the same time condemnation and compassion. Francis used it at the Latin Catholic Church in Bethany, May 24, 2014. In the background, we see the sinner, here the terrorist, is seen as the prodigal son and never, ever as the incarnation of the devil. He makes the singular affirmation that stopping an unjust aggressor is not only a right for the community, but it's also a duty towards the aggressor in the sense that he has a right to be stopped from doing evil. He has his words, not my words. He has the right, the aggressor has the right to be stopped from doing evil. You see, it's radically evangelical vision in discerning situation, in judging situation. This is pure gospel. Gospel calls us not to love the other or the neighbor. The roots, the real profound roots of the gospel is the love of the enemy. And we forgot that completely. Love of our enemies. This is really scandalous, but this is the triumph of mercy. Third point, third aspect of this link between geopolitics and mercy. A geopolitics that does not see Catholicism as a political guarantor of power. Somebody said, Francis strongly resists also the allure of Catholicism seen as a political guarantor, the last empire. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Oh, God. Inheritor of a glorious past. Pillar against the decline, seeing the crisis of a global leadership in the Western world. He removes Christianity from any temptation to continue to be the heir of the Roman Empire. Sacerdotium, priesthood, is clearly separated from imperium. Francis empties spiritual power of its temporal baggage, its rusty armor and rotten braced places. And he gives back to God his true power, which is the power to integrate. This is the unique, true power of God. Francis recalled this in his meeting with the U.S. bishops. He said when he was here in apostolic visit, be careful not to fall into the temptation of confusing the power of strength with the strength of the powerlessness with which God has redeemed us. And also, never, ever make of the cross a banner of worldly struggles. This is what Pope Francis said to the U.S. bishops.
Could you repeat?
Yes. Be careful not to fall into the temptation of confusing the power of strength with the strength of that powerlessness with which God has redeemed us. Bergoglio wants to liberate pastors from the feeling of being at war, surrounded and dismayed under a sort of Masada complex by which the church feels enclosed by a society it must fight against. It's an error It's an error to be nostalgic of the bygone times by preparing harsh responses today. So there is a clear difference here between a Constantinian, the emperor, theopolitical imperial vision that seeks to establish a divine kingdom here and now, where the divine is obviously just the ideal projection of the established power, and a Franciscan theopolitical vision that is eschatological, that it looks to the future and intends to guide history toward the kingdom of God, a kingdom of justice and peace. The first vision generates an ideology of conquest. The second vision generates a process of integration. The Pope on May the 9th, in an interview with the French daily La Croix, said, that was about the Christian roots of our continent, of Europe, which is developed a big debate inside of Europe, the church, in Italy, in my country as well. So he answered saying, this is extremely important for understanding the Pope's vision. Yes, Europe has Christian roots. Christianity has the duty of watering them, but in a spirit of service, as in the washing of feet. The duty of Christianity for Europe is that of service. And again, the contribution of Christianity to a culture is that of Christ washing the feet, or the service and the gift of life. Which are, yes, Europe has a Christian roots, but for sure has a Christian roots. But somebody intends the Christian roots as something like a stone. You're able to throw in front of the others, or something you have to revendicate, something that you have to hold. But his question is more radical. What do you mean? Which are the real Christian roots? And he said the Christian roots are the washing of the feet. Washing the feet is the real Christian gesture. So you have to get back there. Not pretending to impose your vision or ideals. So Francis firmly opposes a Catholicism understood as the last empire, the last surviving and glorious heir to the past, while the Western world faces a crisis of leadership. Bergoglio knows that when the chosen people becomes a party, it enters into an intricate web of religious, institutional, and political dimensions that makes it lose the meaning of its universal service and sets her up against those who are far off, who do not belong, who are the enemy. Being part creates an enemy. We need to escape this temptation. Let me skip a lot of things to say, because there's an awful person over there who are saying 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute. Okay. Okay, the last one. But this is important for me, so I want to try to say that. Perhaps the trip of Pope Francis that is the most emblematic to understand his geopolitical vision based on the gospel was the trip to Abu Dhabi. I started at 2, right? The trip to Abu Dhabi Do you remember that when the Pope was there? Yes. And this is the trip which is the most important and emblematic for understanding his vision. So here in Abu Dhabi emerged the fundamental and warm core of his vision of human fraternity. That is the fruit of faith that we are all children of God. We have to be aware that that was the first time when a pope visited the Arabic Peninsula. And we flew very close to Medina and Mecca. That was when we were, I saw in the, in the screen that we were flying over the Arabic Peninsula, and I saw Mecca, Medina, the cities. I said, wow, this is something historical. I'm living something historical. I have to remember these moments. And so the occasion for the trip to the United Arab Emirates was the Global Conference of Human Fraternity promoted by the Council. Before the arrival of the Pope, 500 religious leaders from all over the world had already joined together, and they had discussion in 21 work groups with 60 presenters and 30 involving Christians, Jewish and other Muslims. There, the Pope signed a document with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmed El-Tayeb. And there is an open dialogue between these two leaders, Al-Tayeb and Pope Francis. And the document, I don't know if you know this, but didn't pass through the Secretariat of State. Usually the documents pass through the official channels. But they kept the document for themselves, sharing some people they choose for deciding if we're good or bad. And the core center of this document is that the recognition of fraternity that changes our perspective. And what comes out of fraternity in this document is citizenship. So if we are all brothers, there aren't any more majorities and minorities, but all together we are called to build our society, being citizens, all the same. You could say, but this is an utopia. Yes, it is. Fine. But they show the path. And they were very serious on that. So they established now a high committee for implementing this document, and all around the world are meetings between Christians, Muslims, and Jewish also for implementing this document. So fraternity has a direct effect in the life of society, building citizenship. And because both of them were aware that minority brings with itself the seeds of tribalism and hostility, which undermine the society in which we live today, many, many different societies. So my address to you this afternoon has sought to spell out the geopolitical significance of France's diplomacy of mercy through at least some, thank you, political leader. No, thank you to him, that guy over there, but also to you. But just pointing out some specific aspects in his vision. And in his geopolitical vision and diplomacy, Francis offers us path to another future. He's a player. This is the image you should have in your mind. He's like a football player, but his way of playing is, when he was a boy, he liked to play a lot, to push the ball outside of the playground. But he needs allies So, and he found them, and he found them many times. So the Kirill, Bartholomew, the Imam of Al-Azhar, people who have a prophetic vision, even if they are aware of the real condition of this world now. But a prophetic vision. This way, together, they could push the ball away of the playground, oblige the others, all of us, to run after them. Thank you.
Please, wrap it with the questions, following the suggestions of Father Spadaro. No right, no wrong. Move forward.
Okay, first question. When Pope Francis accepted the bishops that were ordained by the communist government, did he put into practice the method of the end justifies the means?
No, I don't want to reduce to a principle what he did. So the question is that many bishops have already asked for a recognition by the Holy See. So what the procedure was very practical, was to talk to them. And the person from the Holy See who talked to them realized that they lived the real faith, the Catholic faith. The political condition didn't allow them to be open and to the Holy See because there were some restraints. So at the end, the decision was very clear. So all of them wanted to be in full communion with Rome. And so the agreement was based on this decision, and because all of them, all those who have been recognized as bishop of the Catholic Church, have been already in the right disposition for getting this recognition. It was a long process. It was not easy at all. A lot of visits, a lot of meetings. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to combine two questions. One of them wants to relate the relation between the Holy See and Venezuela, and then specifically
To you.
The other question says that the Pope tries not to take sides. But what do you do in a case where people are facing injustices under a dictatorship? Sure. How can you not take sides?
No, he takes sides on questions or on specific topics or situations. He spoke very clearly many times against injustice. So the question is that he tries to get the best he can, allowing both parties, usually there are two parties or even more parties, to talk together. But if you condemn or speak against directly a party, it's impossible to establish a dialogue. So if you want to be effective, if you want to be good for media, for example, in the case of Rohingya, it was very easy. All New York Times every single day said in the headlines, the Pope has to pronounce the name Rohingya in front of the general of the Myanmar. If he would have done that, it would be great for him, for media, so he could appear as a hero. But it would be terrible for the population. So he couldn't resolve anything, could have resolved anything acting this way. So his way is to get the most of the situation, acting with this open thought, trying to talk to all the parties involved, but also to speak clearly about the situation. For example, the last example I can make as an example is about the Kurds, between Turkey and Syria. He was extremely strong in his address at the end of the Angelus, pointing out not just the two nations involved, Syria and Turkey, but speaking to the international community, because it's up to the international community to mediate. They didn't do anything, especially Europe. So it's their fault, in this sense. So instead of speaking just against one party, he always addressed his message in order to see the big picture and to let the parties to get together.
Okay. Here's one that is going to be fully addressed by Dr. Vélez later, but I think it would be useful for you to comment on it about what, from your experience with the Pope, about how he feels about women's rights within the church.
Yes, he used an expression in Spanish at the synod. I don't know if you are aware of that. So I can repeat it because I don't remember it in Spanish. But he said that he accepted the glow. How do you say in Spanish? Agua, exactly. Which? Exactly, that expression. Say again, loudly. Exactly. So he wants to go deeper. It's very clear for him that this debate about the women inside the church. It's a long path, I'm aware of that. But you should ask a woman more than a priest to talk about it.
Well, Dr. Vélez will have an opportunity to fully go into that later. This question is just, let me just read it out. What is, in your experience, the way mercy and pain can dialogue? Mercy and pain.
Uh-huh. Well, I will think during my trip to Rome, because this is a quite hard question to answer. Pain and mercy. I don't know. The first answer I get is that when you are in pain, you are more available to the help of others, and so you help others to be more merciful. And so we should get the chance, even when we are in pain, for helping others to be better than they are. But this is the only, sorry about that.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you for your passions. Thank you.